We are very glad that Mr. Gray did come before the Merchants Organization. I appreciate that gesture. We do have a couple of things regarding this. First of all, we are going to have our board meeting. The Merchants Committee is a subcommittee of GFI, and also, that's one of the places where we gather information. Our DFI board meeting is on Wednesday, so we're going to be discussing this coming Wednesday. We have a couple of folks have expressed some aesthetic concerns as apply, going back to some of the aesthetic plans that have been made in the past regarding downtown. We've heard from the Grand Theater that the parking spaces directly across from their entrance prove a major concern to them, particularly on evenings when they have events. Because after hours, the 2-hour parking spaces open up and you're allowed to park there throughout the evening. And so the Grand has expressed some concerns to us about what that means for their evening performances and people dropping folks off. Also,
no, that's just pretty much it. Back to I have two things I want to add to it. Back to the full board. As Britton said, the merchants meeting that John attended, we appreciated him attending that meeting. And the results in general were positive for most of the merchants. What we do is we take everything that comes out of the merchants meetings, just like we do other committee members, and we have that presented to the full board. So the full board has not had a chance to even look at this proposal on paper. As far as I know, I don't think, Mr. Gray, that you sent that out to our full board. We issue them to our knowledge anyway. It's on our agenda for Wednesday to talk about, so it will happen soon enough. The second thing I wanted to add is on the aesthetic part of it. I'm fairly new to the downtown historic design and preservation concepts. When I came on the board 3 years ago, I learned that there was a 3-step or 3-phase process for designing the downtown corridors, and 2 of those have been finished, and I believe the St. Clair Mall, the one that we're talking about here, was part of the 2nd phase of that project. We're actually trying to work on phase 3 that would continue up in front of the courthouse and be part of the courthouse construction. That's one of our goals for next year. But we've had some concerns by some of the historic preservation people who are aware of the design of the St. Clair Mall, and they said there were very specific design intents to have a balanced look as you look down the mall toward the old Capitol. So we just wanted to raise those concerns. I mean, they were comments that were made. We don't know one way or the other whether or not that's something we would go with or not, but it was a concern that was raised, and I just wanted to point that out, that there was a very specific design intent when that mall was created, and it's from the look of Main Street all the way down to the old Capitol, and it's supposed to be a very balanced, very formal, traditional presentation of that old state capitol. So that's just an issue we wanted to raise as well. So basically, after our full board meets on Wednesday, we can have more of a position as to what we think about these parking spaces.
Okay. Does any commissioner have any? All right. Well, thank you. Mr. Small, if you got some.
I would. Yeah, when I first saw Commissioner Wilder's email about the asking, said someone had made a proposal that didn't identify who about downtown parking. I contacted DFI figuring that they would be the entity that would be considering that, and was told that they were asked to, and I then submitted, after seeing what the proposal was, after Britton forwarded it to me, submitted comments thinking I was submitting them to them, but then when I learned that John was going to come back, I thought there was a more orderly, a shorter, a little more time in this process. So I sent directly my letter to you all. We will, in the end of this year, had 88 events during the calendar year in the Grand Theater. So we're continuing to grow. About 50 of those are either a daytime or on weekends. The others, some are on weeknight evenings. as well. I've been there probably 50 of them. I'm also there during the day when we receive deliveries, and I observe, and I've learned much more. You know, I was on Washington Street and really didn't understand the dynamic of St. Clair. But the dynamic that I see during the day is that the delivery trucks park across from us beside Subway during the day and deliver to the businesses on Main Street. They also park down on the Serafini's side. In fact, last Friday, I questioned the 4 spaces that John has said, because there was a Cisco semi delivering to the restaurants there. I don't believe could fit in that space. And I didn't measure it because I had not seen his initial proposal. Didn't take the cutout and make it into a loading zone. It's now 15-minute parking, as you all know. It still is parked in all the time during the day by people coming in and out on a regular basis, including now, obviously, with the Woolery there, there's become much more regular parking. And, of course, it's great that they're down there. But there is a heavy use. And the one thing we know is when 5 o'clock comes, well, first, all day, every one of these spaces would be full of people parking. And whether it's downtown workers, as so often it is, as we all know, or others. And in the evening, of course, the apartment dwellers and others will lay in the spaces overnight. For us, when we have events in the evenings now, moving away from deliveries, I believe there's going to be a huge delivery issue if you all did this. Forget the Grand Theater for a minute. I'm talking about downtown business and the trucks that are there, the beer truck on one end, Cisco, Creation Gardens, Bluefin delivering fish, whatever it is. This is where it is. You can't park on Main Street because every space is already taken. So they're turning around the corner, parking by Subway, and then delivering over on the other. So then in the evenings, when we have events, all those spaces are going to be full. Now what happens is that people come to let people off in the theater, whether it's bad weather, whether they're feeble, or just to let people off because they're polite and they're letting their spouse off and going to go park the car. There is more traffic. St. Clair is quite busy in the evening with the vehicular traffic. So that traffic, then you've got a bottleneck that's created. You're going to have a bottleneck during the day when the delivery truck is going to have to park because there's nowhere else. And it's going to block if you all did this. It's a bad proposal. It was better the first time before John added the additional parking, but it's a bad proposal. Of course, back to what I came and have talked to you all before and talked to DFI. When you all in 2005 put the wood frame up to protect the pedestrians from the parking garage, we bought the Grand Theater in January of 2005, and we talked about doing something about the garage, and of course you all initially decided to demolish it, an earlier commission admittedly, and then when I guess Joe Dunn came in and was interested in it, you all then tabled that and looked back at the idea of selling it. The correct resolution of this is to go on and make a decision about the parking garage, just to do something there. Of course, I've advocated supporting your demolition because I believe it won't be used. Now, you all, I've been told, then that, well, the sheriff may want it, then the sheriff doesn't want it, and, all sorts of things. But I'd be happy to answer any questions, but not just from a Grand Theater, but from a movement. This is a narrow street to start with. If you were tearing the street back, all those pavers you have, making it wide again, then perhaps this would be reasonable, but as Terry said, I think this went through a process even before I was involved downtown. I've only been down there 15 years. It was involved before then, but I think this is, I don't know who the downtown John's organization is and who that means the other property owners are. I mean, we certainly are a substantial property owner on St. Clair. From our standpoint, we're against it. I went to my board last week, and then from a downtown standpoint, it's a bad decision. So, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Hayden.
I would just like to at least put on the record too that my husband owns a business downtown as well, making me a 50% shareholder in his business as a spouse. He has a big, although he isn't directly located on St. Clair, he does recognize that there are parking issues. I don't know if it's in my best interest to accuse myself from this discussion with him being a property owner, or if I can maintain city solicitor.
I think that you can certainly be involved in the discussions. I don't know that any vote is going to be taken tonight, but if you think the ownership of that would impact your decision on this issue, then I think you should recuse yourself and abstain from voting.
And per my husband and I guess other business owners that he knows downtown, is they just want parking. You know, plain and simple, it'd be nice, as Mr. Cole said, even if it's demo or fix the parking garage, let's do something. Let's figure out where people are going to park in downtown Frankfort to help support our businesses that are down there.
I have a question for staff. I agree that we need to address parking downtown. That's the most consistent. Not everybody agrees on the best way to address parking downtown, but it does seem to be a pretty consistent desire on the part of downtown property owners and business folks to address parking. This is a hypothetical, but assuming that we're not going to address the parking garage this month, or even next month, assuming that any address of the parking garage, whether or not it's demolition or rehab, will take some time. Is there any harm in an interim measure in this as a purely interim measure? As in, would we cause some kind of damage to the street without parking on it until or unless we got the parking garage figured out? It's just a practical question. I mean, would that harm the street in any substantive way? I think it's a question for Jeff, yeah.
The street was designed for 20. When you make what, Jeff? Sorry, pretty simple. I guess my question is, in what way, like you say, harm the street?
I assume it's going to require some degree of paint. If we were going to put parking spaces down, I assume that can only be done via paint.
Paint, yes.
Can that paint be, could that paint be removed in time without causing substantive damage to the street? I'm wondering if it's even practically possible to do this as a temporary measure until or unless the parking garage is addressed.
Well, it's just the brick material is absorbent, so if you paint over the brick, you can power wash, but there'll probably be some residue left over from the paint.
Sure.
There may be some cleaning solvents that could help power wash the paint off. So as far as painting the brick, there might be some residue. There are products out there that we come across to remove paint from stone curbs, for instance. We inadvertently painted a stone curb. We were able to power wash and use some solvents to remove the paint. The street is 21 feet wide, which would accommodate 12 feet of driving lane and an 8-foot parking lane. There has been some reservation from the fire chief about getting outriggers down for his fire trucks with the parking. I think the parking, if it was considered, needs to be on the east side because of the one-way street on Main Street turning in. I think the proposal written by Mr. Gray, parking needs to be on the east side of the mall. Make that, to allow bigger trucks making a turn.
The process you're describing regarding removing the paint, is that, would you consider that prohibitively expensive or difficult?
just a lot of elbow grease.
Yeah.
It's prohibited. I think that's something we could do in-house with our department,
And the material expense would be,
minimum.
I'm as eager as anybody to get the parking garage addressed and to find any other larger scale solutions. In terms of any opposition to this, I'm hearing, concerns from the Grand, and I'm hearing aesthetic concerns. And to be blunt, if anybody else is here to speak to this, I'd be happy to hear from them before going any deeper.
Well, I guess I'd just like to clarify.
Come up, put it on the envelope, and give us your name.
Speaking of
For the record.
Push the hell out of the way. I'm Martha Gray, so you can probably guess what side of this issue I'm on. I don't have a whole lot to add to what my husband's already said, but I guess I do want to clarify something relative to DFI. And I think the only person sitting up here that remembers the mall wars is Commissioner May. But I was on the downtown Frankfort board when the trees were taken out, when that proposal was made, when the trees came up. And the proposal from DFI was to remove the trees and put in 2 lanes of traffic and parking. And the only reason that those wide sidewalks are there at all was because it was a compromise. It was a way to try to make people who love the trees, and I understand why they love the trees, but it was a way to try to make them happy. And frankly, at the time, and I can remember talking to Commissioner Roach, she was also a commissioner at the time, just ad nauseum, that didn't solve the problem. And we still have the same problem today. I mean, the conversation was, the reason that we want to have the trees come out is because, not because we hate trees, but because to make businesses viable in the downtown, on that stretch of road, you need to have drive-by visibility and parking. And that doesn't mean necessarily that a space is always going to be available right where you want to go. But people need to at least have the illusion or in their subconscious mind that if they drive downtown, they drive down that street, they're going to be able to find a place to park. If they circle a while, they're going to be able to find a place to park. If they know right off the bat that there's nothing there, they won't come. Now, Mr. Colas talked about the grant, and I guess I have a couple of issues with that. I mean, I understand his concerns, but the grant, to my understanding, is heavily subsidized, or was heavily subsidized with government money. And, I pulled their event calendar off. We're talking a handful of nights a month, largely in the evening or on the weekends, when there isn't much traffic down there. And I just came from down there. There was a car, a single car on St. Clair. So again, while I understand his concerns, the real barrier to trying to get viable businesses down there is the lack of parking. It really is. And what we're talking about is a temporary fix. And I guess, having lived this now for 15 or 16 years, again, I understand why people were upset about the mall. But the compromise, when you're talking about the balance, again, the only reason that those aprons are in there is because people were upset about the greenery leaving the scene. So it didn't actually solve, open up the street, but it didn't solve the problem of parking. And that's still, Mr. Cole's talking about his experience, what he sees. We can tell you plenty about our experience with tenants, one of whom just recently left because she has a viable business in Versailles that's right on the street. It's still a viable business, but she couldn't make it go down here because there's no parking in front of that building. You really, I hope, will seriously consider putting parking down there, even if it is a temporary fix. I mean, if I could convince you to take those white aprons out, I really think that would solve a whole lot of problems. And I think Mr. Coles basically said, if that wasn't here, he wouldn't be here talking about it either. I mean, then his people that come to the Grand would have places to park. They would have easy access going back and forth, easy ability to drop off friends and relatives. It may look pretty, but it's a real barrier to revitalizing that particular stretch in the downtown. And it's going to remain that way. If there's no parking there, that St. Clair is going to struggle for the next 15 years. And again, and you'll remember this, there was a young planner here who I think he came from Savannah. He's from Savannah.
And it was his idea to put in those wide aprons. And I, again, remember saying, this kid, he was a kid, 20-something kid, first job. Oh, he'll be gone in a couple of years, and we're gonna be stuck with no parking. We're gonna be stuck having difficulty getting businesses into these buildings. And sure enough, 2 years later, he was gone, and it's now 15 years later, and we have the exact same problem. Like, and I guess I would also add, well, with the fire chief, I think he would agree with me if he's still here. The mall wars, the fight over taking those trees out of the first place, it was very emotional, acrimonious. It was horrible, but it was the right thing to do. And in reality, had those trees not come up, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because that entire block would have gone up when our buildings caught fire. I mean, the fire chief told John that he wouldn't have been able to get, we're talking about whether there's enough room on a street where you can actually pull a fire truck down there. There was no room at all. He wouldn't have been able to get those trucks down there, and it would have jumped from building to building to building until the entire block was gone. So, I guess I think that's a concern, but there is room for the fire trucks. I think that, the way it can be configured to allow for that. And if you really sincerely want a revitalized downtown, I mean, we certainly do, we've been working at it for years. But if this commission seriously wants that, you've got to put parking on that street. And you've got to put it on the street. Because, again, it's a psychological barrier. When you can find articles about how people will go to a mall, they go to Fayette Mall, and they'll park in the back 40. But they'll go there because they know there's going to be a space. They won't come into downtown even though there are spaces available close by. Because in their mind, there's a parking problem. And there's certainly a parking problem on St. Clair. And again, if you want nice businesses, if you want restaurants where you can eat and places where you can shop, you've got to create an environment that's business friendly, and that includes having parking access. It really does. So I hope that you will consider that proposal, even if you need to modify it somehow. I understand the balance question, but again, those aprons probably shouldn't be there at all, but that's where we are.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis.
Is there any laws that require when you put in so many parking spots that so many of them have to be handicap spaces? Do we know that exists? Would any of these have to be handicapped?
There isn't development. If you're building a building or something, you have to have a motel, but not.
But if you're just putting in some parking spaces, I don't know, I'm just trying to.
Could I ask a question, even though I know, in addition to our issue still, the delivery truck issue, has someone really looked at, Jeff, the number of trucks that are there and the size of those trucks? I know John said the 4 spaces, but the fact, again, I know they park, because it's where we receive deliveries too, along with the bistro and others on our end of, and then they park on the other end too at the same time. I don't see how this accommodates those as well. The street's just too narrow. I mean, it's as you said, it's 12 feet if you take 8 out for parking.
No, it's
20 now.
20 now.
I know that, but that would not be the way. It's gone after this, if you do this. It's 12 feet.
If you take 8 feet for parking.
Yeah, you take 8 feet for parking.
12 feet is adequate for 1 lane of traffic.
I know, but it's not adequate for somebody to make deliveries and that
In
many
addition
people to get by. It is, as someone studied the volume of delivery traffic during the daytime.
Are you asking whether double parking would be allowable on that 12-foot drive lane in addition to the?
I know there's no.
Then that wouldn't be possible. They would have to get ticketed or.
I know, but there's nowhere for the delivery trucks to go.
I think there's plenty of room for a delivery truck here, and under this proposal, about half the street would still enjoy the full 20, the full width of 20. Now granted, a chunk of that would be double parked right here, but, I think, sure there's plenty of room for a delivery truck. A lot of these businesses, there's also
Well, they can't fit in.
loading
They
opportunities
can't fit in with all
around the corner.
due
There's also
respect.
loading opportunities around the corner here and there. And in terms of the fire truck access, I mean, that full width of 20, I mean, you can see what I'm talking about. We got about half the street here would be 20 feet wide. So in terms of being able to get the legs out on the fire truck as described, that seems like plenty of room. To be bluntly honest, I think the only substantive concern that I have about this is the aesthetic concern, which is, I realize that might seem relevant to some folks, but I think that is a little legitimate, or potentially legitimate. It really might negatively impact the view of the old Capitol, which, parking's important downtown, but the character of downtown is also important. So I get that. But I definitely don't think that what does or doesn't happen on St. Clair. I mean, I really don't think it would be reasonable for those decisions to be subservient to an enterprise that's only open about, 15% of the time?
88 in a year is 1 out of every 4 days.
You said, okay.
But
I thought you said you had 50 evening events a year.
I said there were 50 events. There are 50 events on the weekend.
Oh, okay. So
And on the daytime,
more than 25
and 88 total.
And about 24% of the time.
I didn't say you should be subservient. I just said that I would question whether it's a study of the delivery
But
issue.
you're also saying that folks wouldn't be able to drop off in front of the Grand, but,
Because all the parking spaces would be full.
yeah, but that's not really true. There would be a loading zone, aka drop-off zone immediately adjacent to the entrance to the
And
Grand.
you don't think they'll be parked in the evening like they
Well, I mean-
often are?
All we can do is make it legal or illegal to park in certain places. I mean, by the rationale.
They're not enforced.
If the rationale is that we can't decide who does and doesn't park in certain places on St. Clair, this whole discussion is moot. I mean, if the rationale is that people can park anywhere they want to regardless of what the law says, then what do you do? Parallel parking on St. Clair, done. You don't need to change the law or anything. In reality, we have to set standards and do our best to enforce them. I think the big problem with those ordinances right now is the fact that they're 15-minute zone. As we've heard multiple times from our own enforcement officers, the 15-minute loading zone is inherently unenforceable, and that the only really truly enforceable parking spots downtown are the 2-hour spaces.
Commissioner Gomez.
As a point of information for the commission and the audience, some few months ago, the commission expressed that they would like to, as far as the St. Clair Garage, they would like to see that in private hands rather than in being operated and run by the city. Therefore, we've made several attempts to talk with private individuals, and there is presently a private individual who's interested and said that he will probably make he's making a study of the garage, and he's got his own engineer looking at the garage, and he said he would probably be making an offer. Of course, we've been through this several times, and it has not been fruitful. But we still do have one person who is interested in it at this point. And I think we all agree, I think everybody in this room agrees that a big part of the answer to all the parking problems would be if we could get that garage up and running. So we do have at least one person interested in doing that at this time.
Is there some type of time frame that this person said that may be coming back to us?
At first, they